Hey everybody, so it is that time of the week again, and I am back for another Heresy Hump Day chat. So today I have a table update as usual and some different topics that I'm going to talk about. Topics today are going to be Battletech. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience so far with the game, what I like about it, and just some initial observations as a new person playing the game for the first time. And I'm going to talk about and show. I want to talk about Rockefeller Sr., the oil tycoon. I want to talk a little bit about my interest in that and that individual, and just I have an artifact that I want to show and get a little bit of opinion on some folks that are into history and just some thoughts from you guys, in addition to just some discussion. So for the history folks, you might be interested in this, even though it's not military. I'll talk about that. And I want to talk about YouTube trouble, as far as some things that I've encountered recently and some other folks on YouTube, as far as war gamers, just with the new YouTube and things going on, how it's affected me, and a little bit about my plans with it and just some of the stuff that's happened to me and how I got around it. Kind of little, but just I thought I'd bring it up. All right, so before we actually go into these three topics today, I am going to show my sponsored beer for this evening, and it is New Belgium's Voodoo Ranger. So now this is an 8-hop pale ale, is what it's described as. Made by New Belgium, which I believe is actually the same company that makes Last Best IPA, if I'm not mistaken, which is one that I quite like. I often, at the pub that I occasionally go to, they have that on tap, and it is one of my favorites. The other thing is that it says that this is brewed and bottled by New Belgium Brewing, Fort Collins, Colorado, but then what I was looking for here is it says also Asheville, North Carolina. Now, the longtime viewers on the channel, you may know that I go to Asheville because I have family that live there. Even though I'm from New York originally, I've lived in Asheville for a number of years, lived in other areas of North Carolina as well. And I actually go to Asheville quite often. Asheville, as I understand it, has been called, even though I always think of Colorado as the beer mecca of the U.S., Asheville is very much becoming a beer mecca as well, if not is already considered one. I would think probably already considered one. And so that's very cool. I was actually introduced to microbrews when I lived in Asheville. That was back in 1998, 99. And yeah, so I have actually tasted this one. It is really good. It's a really nice... If somebody told... This says 8-hop pale ale. If somebody just told me this was an India pale ale, I'd be fine with that because it's fairly hoppy. With the India Pale Ale, you're also looking for that oak taste from the original oak casks that the British military transported the beer in when going to India. I don't know that I taste that in here, but that is something that is a characteristic of an India Pale Ale, and perhaps that's not included here. But very nice. Really nice. On a side note, since we're talking about the sponsored alcohol, I had visited a meadery in Alberta recently that's near a property that I often go to when I have free time. And it's a new meadery, and had picked up some mead. And I know I've had mead on the channel before, but I'm going to feature that in the future, the mead that I had purchased. So, let's freeze there, and we will come back for after the table update. So the first thing I wanted to show is that, for the most part, I have completed the sculpting on my tower. And so it is big enough that right now it is technically still curing the very top of it, and I have a little rock formation. Rather than just making an individual rock with some of my extra sculpting, I kind of created a little bit of a formation, sculpted it to be able to just put on something at one point, even for terrain or something. And so I have that and my tower drying. And so what I've finished is the top, and I have a little Saga miniature in there just to show kind of how high I made it as far as on the wood flooring that it's sitting on. I'm actually really quite pleased with it. It was very much a learning experience. I would say in general the epoxy sculpt was beautiful to work with, and although it's always a learning experience to work with a new medium, it wasn't that hard to pick up, having worked with green stuff in the past and milliput and other things. I think probably, I don't know really what I was trying to go for. I mean, in the sense that I do think it's nice to be able to maintain consistent methods. I do find that because I did it over time in sections, I had some variability up the tower. It doesn't bother me much, and I should say it doesn't bother me. I think that if I was trying to achieve a very uniform look and just, was very dedicated to that, I'd probably want to figure out a way to try to standardize my methods a bit. Like I used essentially a credit card to go around and make my horizontal lines, and I just used a sculpting tool. I think one of the things that made it difficult was trying to make sure I had a uniform layer of clay at all times on the can. That's kind of where it became a little harder. I know Mr. BM Builder, he had some good suggestions. I don't think related to that piece of my issue. I think it was more just in making the top. He said like I could get a piece of PVC pipe and then cut a piece off to then create the top. Which was a really good idea, because you could essentially have two separate pieces if you were trying to make like your top piece, and so I may actually consider trying that in the future. But I really do think that when I paint this up, it's going to be a nice tower for Saga or Warhammer Fantasy. It probably, of the two, leans better towards a more fantasy tower in my mind, as far as like a craggy sort of weathered sort of tower. But I don't really see why it couldn't be used for Saga as well. I think it's going to be nice. And so, yeah, I will do something else in the future, for sure, with epoxy sculpt. I'll likely do another stone structure, and I'll just take what I've learned from this one and try to perfect even further. So, I'm going to cut to the table a bit closer. So I do have my Orcs and Goblins, or my Snotling Pump Wagon, finished. I debated whether I'd even show this on the channel, because really there wasn't much to be done after I showed what I showed last time. I really mainly just picked up some details here and there, like on this horn and things, but it really is the same as what I showed last time, and so there wasn't much work to do on that. But what I did do is work further on my Malifaux crew. Now I'm trying to remember, I think since the last video, I'm not sure if I showed it at this stage, but really, other than the base itself, this guy is done. And since doing the oil wash and having a discussion, many people had encouraged me to do I mentioned what I was going to do, and it's just further highlight to create some more contrast for a non-metallic metal look. And so I did do that. I do think I did agree with those assessments, and so as you can probably see here, it is darker and lighter than it was in the last video, and I am happy with this. Definitely another learning experience trying the non-metallic metal. I created the glowy effects, and so I can't remember if I have showed this already to this point, but what I know I haven't shown is I've gotten to really the oil wash stage of all of them now. For the leader of the group, I've not painted the mini himself. I've kind of just still have him as a yellow, what I've done with my airbrush to get working on the rest. So really this is the part that I've mainly worked on. Now I still have to do the highlights and the further darkening, but sort of like bringing this guy to this stage. And yeah, so that's sort of going to be the next piece, is to work on this one as well. I have other ones that I've gotten to the oil wash stage, where I've finished the oil wash, and I will do the blue effects as well as further level of highlighting and shading of for that non-metallic look. This is one that I actually quite like so far. I really like the way the wings came out with using the technique here and here. So I have it lighter on top, obviously. I've not done the back. I am going to do some of the cans like in other colors on this like sort of backpack thing. But I am liking how that's coming out, particularly the shading under the wings. And I have the other hunter cat there. Then there's just this mechanical assistant, which I think is looking... I think the assistant is looking pretty consistent with the others. So, I am going to also be working on the Savage Core minis that I just got. I have some ideas. I'll probably put those in a separate video as far as the ideas of what I'm looking at doing. I just have some rough ideas right now, mostly on the coloration that I want to do for the Atlantean, and then the skin and hair color for the Neanderthals that I wanted to try. So, alright, well, I will come back to the chat. Alright, so first topic is Battletech. Now, many of you know that I've actually taken up Battletech in the last month or so, and I have had 2 games so far. Now, both of those games were in what they call a 2,000 battle value range. So that's a lance, which is a fairly typical, I guess, force that you would have in Battletech, is 4 mechs, and these are like the large robots that have humans piloting them, and far future of humanity kind of thing. And we've been playing about half that just to kind of work on the rules. Now, we are playing Battletech Total War, or Classic Battletech, so the game is admittedly a little bit slower and more rule-intensive than probably the Alpha Strike version. I haven't played the Alpha Strike version, but I think from everything I've seen of it and listening to other people that that's a fair assessment. Now, I guess I was looking at my viewfinder there. I think I have it plugged in right now. I just hate to have it shut off while we're doing the video. One of the things that I really noticed, we're playing on one of your standard Battletech, I guess, maps, because they have maps, sort of like a board game that you can use that it's designed to play on, and then it's a hex-based game, and each of the hexes have things like area terrain on them, and just things that in the hex printed, either with a picture as well, sometimes with text saying like what level of ground you're on, whether you're higher level or lower level, or whether there's, you know, woods or this or that. And that's what we're doing right now, which I think is good because, one, we don't have the folks that I'm playing with like an extensive hex mat with terrain, like 3-dimensional terrain at the moment to use. But in playing the game so far, even with just the 2 mechs and kind of going through a bit of a slower period when first starting just to kind of get the rules down, one of the things that I did notice is it seemed really hard initially to hit each other. Like, like in many cases, you hit on like 2 6-sided dice, and in many cases, you know, we are, for the first half of the game, when closing in and people are moving either quickly or they're far away from each other, you're hitting on 10s often, which is really hard, and you're expending heat, you know, like every time you're discharging guns. And if you have many of the weaponry, you know, generate heat on your robot, which is, or your big mech, which is a negative factor, you know, in the performance of your machinery. And so at times, I think one of the players that I play with, who's also just recently started like myself, I mean, you kind of express a little bit of frustration and a little bit of wonder about that. Now, having said that, I think we're all really enjoying it. I think, personally, my take on it is that it takes some time probably to learn the weaponry and to learn the mechs, because there's a wide variety of options to play different kinds of mechs in the game. And the game itself, you can play at various time periods, and so we're playing early eras right now. Like, we're playing before, there was a whole piece, and I've referred to this on the channel, where you have a clan invasion and you have like this advanced society that are also humans, but they've been broken away for a while. They became really advanced, and then they came back, and there was this sort of war. We're playing prior to all that, so we're playing with a lot of the older mechs, like just a bit more basic, I think, and that's the way I'm preferring it right now. I don't even own any of those advanced mechs and the later time period stuff, and so I'm just sticking with this at the moment. But I think the mechs you choose and learning all of them, I think can really, and how to best place your placement on the map in the game, a lot of that is really going to affect, I think, how you perform in the game. I don't know, clearly, like, when we were 75% into our game, some major damage was happening, and so it isn't that you stay fresh throughout the whole game. I mean, like, as you're playing, there's a certain point where, I had, a mech that was turned relatively inoperable, practically, in one of the games. And, like, that is what causes you to lose the game, obviously. And there is lots of scenarios if you want to play scenario-driven games. But right now, we're kind of playing, let's just shoot each other up to get the rules down. One of the things that I really enjoyed, though, is in the last game that I played, one of my Marauder, which is like a heavier mech, lots of armor and things like that, at one point, all of the armor on the whole side of the thing was just being torn apart. It was getting to the point where damage to it was getting into internal systems on the left side of the Marauder because of where he was placed and who he was fighting. The person was on the left side, so the majority of the damage was to the left side. I remember at one point we were really close in with our mechs, and I think I had turned the Marauder maybe more towards the right side to kind of position him to have fresh armor on the side where the opponent was, because I have good weapons on both sides. And I remember we were in close combat range, like physical range, where you could literally be pummeling each other. And when my opponent was deciding what to do, I was just watching, and I could just see him intently looking at the mechs. And they're really just like two chess pieces. I mean, granted, there are facings where you're a hexagon, and the way you're facing has arcs and things like that. But because you have just a couple of pieces on the table, I remember him just intently looking at it when he was thinking of what he was going to do. And I could just almost cut the concentration in the air. I mean, that's how much he was just sort of looking at it. Afterwards he was talking about what he was thinking about, but he was like looking at where he was placed with his armor, the terrain around him and how that was going to affect things, and where the other mech was, and where the arcs were, and where his mechs were, and considering the weapon ranges, and for the long-range weapons, and some of them you have minimum ranges, for you perform very poorly close up with some of your heavy artillery. And it was just interesting. This kind of references back to another video that I had when I was talking about Musket and Tomahawks, or other games where they're a bit quicker play and you have much more models on the table for like a skirmish game, where literally sometimes you also have facing things going on with your quicker skirmish games, but literally at times you're just sweeping miniatures off the table as they die. And you're thinking about, maybe your strategy is at the table level, and you're thinking about units going forward and areas of terrain that you might be putting units in and all this stuff. But in this case, all of the detail were in the individual two miniatures positioned next to each other. So you had like your mech near the other mech, and you had to almost use your imagination, because if you really were there watching the narrative of this game go, my mech would have been half destroyed and ripped apart all up on one side. And this thing's like, well, literally 75 tons. That's how heavy this particular mech is. And you're talking about things that are in the area of 30 feet tall, maybe more, depending on the mech. And it was almost the way I was when I was preparing for this video and writing out a little bit of a table. I described it as a universe of interaction, like within these two miniatures. And there was so much detail in what was going on at one point, I think on his, I actually hit one of his, I hit his engine through his, I got in through his armor and I hit his engine through his internal systems, because basically below your armor you also have some protection with your internal, but I ended up doing a critical and basically getting into his engine with my weaponry. And this is all stuff like you're imagining like the engine within the miniature, the armor on the outside, the armor underneath, the locations on the side, all of the different kinds of weapons, the pilot inside, potentially getting jostled, like when it, and that you have to make rolls for that, stepping down into water, in different levels, ripping a tree out of the ground and hitting the guy with it. Like, there's all of this is in the rules, and it's just for a simple lead miniature on the table. And so it's funny, I'm interested in you guys if you have some comparisons of other rules in miniature gaming that seem to go to that level of detail. In some ways, there are days when I just wouldn't want to play a game like that, but there are days when I absolutely would, and I think in some ways it's the beauty of Battletech. The actual, what it can do for your imagination, and it's an old game, it's been around a really long time, but it's really a well thought out system, at least through the iterations over time, I'm guessing. Although I have a feeling that some folks will tell me that it's always been that good. I'm guessing that a lot of the core of the game has been around since the beginning. So yeah, as you can probably tell, I am really interested in the wargaming aspect of Battletech and what it brings to the table. The other thing I wanted to mention is I do think that I am going to want to play it on a three-dimensional wargaming table rather than the maps that like the game is originally and usually played on, like designed for. I'm looking at maybe getting a felt hex table and actually building some different levels of terrain to represent lakes and woods and more of an outdoor table, trees and things like that, and then potentially even buildings and things. And I know some folks will actually even put you can use infantry in the game to have little 6mm scale figures, but also some people use Z-scale miniatures even to represent civilians outside of cities and things like that. And I think that would be really neat. The game, I'm really intrigued with the rules, and I think if I can bring the visual up to where I'd like it to be with a proper wargaming table, that Battletech with the rule system could really make for some really fun games for a long time. And so yeah, that's my Battletech sort of perspective so far. I know I have a couple of new subscribers, or at least commenters, that have commented a little bit on my Battletech videos, and so if you have some thoughts on anything I've said, either based on the terrain or my perspectives on the game or things to add, by all means, please comment on it. I'm interested in your comments. So this next one is going to be maybe a little harder to show the artifact that I was talking about because I'm in my chat mode, but I'll do my best. But I'll start out just by talking a little bit about John D. Rockefeller Sr. and why I'm even bringing that up. I do enjoy history, and outside of wargame, there was a period of time where I was intensely interested in sort of the history of business. I went through a period where it really matched up the early tycoons in the early 1900s, and even mid to late 1800s, the folks that sort of shaped the industrial world of the 1900s in the U.S. in particular, and mirror that with the development of the railroad and all of that kind of stuff. I found very interesting for a very long time. But some of the tycoons of industry in that era, a lot of how business was done up through to the creation of corporations, modern day corporations in the U.S., pre-internet, were shaped by these individuals. And one of the first ones that I looked in, and I would say the individual I had the greatest amount of fascination for, was John D. Rockefeller Sr. Now, it may have changed since I last looked, but even within the last few years, if you actually looked at the value of money accounting for time and the worth of the dollar and things like that, John D. Rockefeller Sr., as of a few years ago, when I looked into it at least, was the wealthiest man to ever set foot on the earth. Just the scale of his monopoly prior to the Sherman Act, which was essentially created in a large part because of him to prevent monopolies in the U.S. He, just basically controlled the oil, right? Standard Oil, which he built, his company, which was then broken into many other smaller companies that we recognize gas stations from today, particularly in the U.S., was his creation and was just a huge, monstrous machine. Now, I read this biography called Titan a while ago. I'm going to say it was probably 2010, 2011, based on something I'll talk about in the future when I saw some dates. So I guess it's like 8 years ago or so I read this. It's a pretty long book. It's like 650 pages, or, it's not that long, I guess, but it's actually almost 700 pages. He had a very, very interesting life. He didn't come from money. He actually wasn't well off, in his upbringing, but at a very young age was selling, raising turkeys to sell to people, and just making money even as a young man, really, really young kid, and really is always, he just, I guess, incrementally went into the business world at various stages of his career and became who he was. And I always marveled at how he reacted to things in his life, and just how he went about everything, with his own personal life and his business life. Now, many of you may really feel negative thoughts on John D. Rockefeller because of how much money he made, and it was, to a degree, at the expense of competitors. He was definitely, his victory was within a free market capitalist setting where the rules were, there were no rules against monopolies when he'd started all this, and he played by the only rules there were, which was just competition and just, doing anything you can within those rules. I mean, he wasn't a gangster or anything like that. I mean, it was based on using scale, economies of scale, and his successes to leverage things to squeeze other people out of areas. And he was very competitive, and he worked by the rules that he understood to come out and succeed. Now, I'm not commenting on any of that and saying, but I did just find the things he did and his influences on the modern corporation, and then later his philanthropy with all of the money he made, to be very interesting, and I've always just had a little bit of a fascination. And so that's a long-winded intro into a very specific thing that I wanted to talk about today, and that is, I kind of, at the time when I was reading that book, I kind of wanted something that felt somewhat unique and personal in my reading of multiple books of these tycoons. I wanted something just to attach to all this, and I kind of got that in the form of a press photo. And based on my receipt of sale, I knew there was something up. I don't know if any of you have ever bought press photos, on eBay or anything like that. There was somebody got a whole bunch of old newspaper photographs, press photographs, and they were selling them on eBay of just about anything. And I noticed this particular seller just had lots of stuff. And I had found this John D. Rockefeller, and it says original press photo, and it says 1969. Now, Rockefeller died, I believe, in the early 30s. It's right around that area, and he was 98 when he died in the early 30s. I believe he was 98 when he died. Pretty old age, I think. Either 88 or 98, but I think it was 98. I think it was that old, and it's a pretty ripe old age for someone at that time period. But this says in the description, this is a 1969 John D. Rockefeller original press photo. Now, one thing you might immediately think is, well, maybe that's junior and not senior. That's quite possible. I don't remember when, off the top of my head, when his son had passed away, who also is really known in history. Like he created Rockefeller Center. He did a lot with his father's money, like, as far as like philanthropy through the world, and he did actually have lots of influence and do a lot within history. But as his dad, Senior, is clearly the one that set the tone and created the fortune. So I saw this 1969 John D. Rockefeller original press photo. I very much know the difference between the look of the father and the son, because they actually don't heavily look alike. They actually look quite different. I don't know if... I'd have to see pictures of John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s mother, the wife of John D. Rockefeller Sr. again, to understand whether that is the case. But I got this thing. It's a press photo. It's the first time I've ever purchased a press photo. It is clipped on one side. Let's see the best I can show it here. I realize this is not my camera angle. So in a press photo, I guess they show these chalk marks where they're chalking an original photo, perhaps for usage within a newspaper. I'm not that familiar with printing. Please comment if I've not researched it, but I notice press photos do things like that, like there's marks and things on it, like they're using it in a newspaper. That is clearly John D. Rockefeller Sr. in this photo titled, that it's based on like 1969 press photo. And so I knew that there was something up with that, because we're looking at 30 to 40 years after his death. So it's not possible that this was 1969. Now, there are lots of markings on the back of this. One of them does say March 2nd, 1969. Yeah. So you can see that right there. Lots of things on here. It says, notice this photograph's released for your publication only on the condition that the following credit be given to photo by International News Service. That's what it says right there. But, it says, scribbled in pencil, Rocky A, 2 by 3 inch, 2 3/8 inch by 2.5 inch. I can't read what it says underneath that. But there are a number of other markings, like just a number scribbled in pencil. Then there's another thing that says John Rockefeller, taken February 21st. Oh, that's interesting. Because you see, this didn't really stand out, and there's so much scribbling on this that I didn't quite even read this well until now. Because one of the things that struck me is it says filed before June 1919. Right here. I don't know if you can see that. Filed before June 1919. And then, in pencil, in the very middle, it's funny because there's regular pencil mark that says John D. Rockefeller, and then there's blue written over it with a swirl, that kind of blue that outlines John, and then a swirl over it. But then below it, it says taken February 21st /15. And until now, I don't know why I never noticed that one piece. With all this scribble in the middle, I was paying attention so much to the stamps in this filed before 1919 that I never paid attention enough to see this taken February 2nd, 1915, or /15. I'm assuming it's not 2015, because the date that I purchased this was also surprising to me. I thought if you would have asked me before today, like when I picked this up, I would have just said, 3 or 4 years ago. But it's just what happens when you get old. Like, I'm kind of just getting old, and I purchased this in 2011, and we're going on 2018. So I've had this, it'll be 9 years, like not that long from now, and sitting in an envelope in bubble pack in my closet, going to mount this on a wall. What I wanted to do to mount it, and I won't digress too much, but I wanted something where I could put this behind glass and have it such that it's a clear frame where I can just take it off the wall and look at all the writing that I just showed you on the back, rather than covering it up and having it properly mounted where you wouldn't see it. because to me some of the charm of this is just the history behind it. And so, what are your thoughts? Are any of you familiar with press photos? I think he was probably in his 70s to 80s here. I can actually, when I finish the video, I'll go back and look at the date again. But if he died in, like, let's just say 1930, I think it was around there, and he was like 98. Even if we just said 100, then, you know, he'd be 15 years younger. So roughly between 70 and 75, maybe even 78 or something. But what I'm wondering is this a... it's obviously not a negative, you know, that you would have at the time. But it does seem like it's an authentic print. There definitely may have been more than one. And I'm not asking if this is worth like a lot of money. Like that's not at all like my concern, but or even interest. This was sold to me for a nominal amount of money, and I think I bought this for American like less than $20. But I actually thought it was a pretty cool thing because it actually is a bit of a piece of history, even at the level of just the news. An actual something from the news from 2015, an actual photograph that has all this stamp and documentation of the dates that it went through. And this is John D. Rockefeller, an actual photo, like a press photo. So what do you guys think? Do you guys, any of you know about press photos? Is it fair to say that even though it says 1969 on what I purchased, original press photo, I'm guessing that this photo is way before that? I wonder if they cataloged it again in 1969, and that's why they call it that, and it's the date that's on there. But yeah, like this pencil mark on the back saying taken February 21st, 2015, I suppose there's no documentation to say that's authentic, but then with the stamp next to it saying filed before it, 1919, I think there's got to be some credence to that, given that he wasn't alive in 1969, so none of the other dates make sense at all. And it seems to match up with the date around when he would have been at that age. So I think it's very cool. I do have another thing from my obsession with this, and that is I have a newspaper clipping from France that talks about Standard Oil that shows a really cool Art Deco futuristic kind of car driving with like oil kind of iconography like in the background, just from that era. And I also found that to be very interesting, and so I have that actually in a clear sort of thing on a wall too. Yeah, so I thought I'd share that. I don't think I ever brought up my interest in this kind of stuff. It's something that I was kind of really interested in like maybe 9 years ago, and have maintained that a little bit, but still have an interest in it. And so, yeah, I thought it might be just an interesting thing to bring up for the chat. My last thing to talk about is YouTube trouble. So, some of you may be aware of Warhammer Fritz 40k or Fritz 40k and how he actually lost his channel recently. He had upwards of 30,000 subscribers, and virtually just his channel was just taken away without any explanation. I think it said for violation of terms of service, but no explanation as to why. And a number of other folks within people's channels that I watch, whether it be, I think Nick may have mentioned, I think he definitely did mention this, and as well Pete over at Mini Warzone have mentioned having their content and videos flagged as being inappropriate and having their monetization shut off. Also, it's shut off in such a way that unless you have like 1,000 views within 7 days, like they can't guarantee they can review the monetization being shut off to then, uphold a decision to, or a review to just show that because you mentioned something like wargaming that you're not like a terrorist or something like that. Like it's not the computer making a mistake when it's searching through all these things. And so I've been thinking about this, and it's in the context of, many of you probably know I do have monetization on my videos, and so there are ads that come up. Many of you probably don't know, I think I've talked about it, but you probably have heard that we don't really get hardly anything from that. I've never, since March, having the ads up, made a cent on it, and that's because you have to make at least $100 before they'll send you a check. And honestly, since March, I've made $40 of theoretical money. And so we're looking at, in order to get a check that you'll be taxed on, almost a year of making videos, if not more, depending on how much traffic you get. So clearly it's not a money thing like that make the advertisements for a channel like mine valuable. One of the reasons why I became a partner with YouTube is that it gave me a couple extra features, and in particular, the one that really stands out is that I don't believe I was able to publish videos in advance unless I have the partnership. And that is actually a really nice thing if you do want to kick out some videos and maintain a steady stream of content. You want to be able to place them when you want to in some cases. You might only have so much time to make a couple of videos, and you might not want to put them all out at once. Like, you might want to actually trickle them out just so you're not flooding people all at once and they don't get to fully appreciate each one, potentially. And so that was really the value of the monetization for me. Now, having said that, I have followed it and just kind of wondered, like, oh, it's peaking today, it's not, like looking at the statistics. And, so I have kept an eye on the monetization, and I noticed, after listening to Idic Beer and Pete, I noticed that one of my recent videos where I did the comparison of the paints was just flagged for the first one out of all of them as being unsuitable content for advertisers, potentially because of various things, and it can be anything. But they don't tell you. Now, when I first saw that, I was like, oh, here we go, this is what everybody's talking about. And I was disappointed because if I'm going to monetize at all, some of the videos that have actually done well are the ones that are actually more general, in the sense that, like, things like my review of Epoxy Sculpt get a lot of views because not just people in wargaming are interested in that. Now, I clearly say in the beginning that my context is wargaming, but, those are the kind of videos that oftentimes are nice to actually have monetized, because of the amount of views, if you're going to do it at all. And so what I saw how it said, just like Pete had mentioned, that unless you see at least 1,000 views within 7 days, they're probably not going to review it. And so I clicked the review thing, I turned the monetization off, but I had it reviewed. I wanted to have it reviewed. Now, I don't get close to that amount of traffic, so I thought, well, now that they've singled me out for whatever reason, likely it means I just can't monetize the video as the outcome. I was considering trying to become not a partner with YouTube again, because the money thing isn't really that big of a deal, and I kind of thought, well, if this is going to be the way it is, and I'll just go back to the way it was before, I won't be able to do videos in advance, but whatever, it is what it is. And so I looked into it. I couldn't even figure out how you actually unpartner. I know how to shut monetization off. It may mean I have to go through and shut all the monetization on my videos off, but at the end of the day, it didn't seem easy to not be a YouTube partner. Like, I think it still would have said partner next to my name. And so I just sort of sat on it and I left it, and I just didn't do anything with it. So this morning, I just out of curiosity, I went into that video again and I clicked back on the monetization, and it went green to now you're monetized again. And eventually the ad started on it again. So either it had been reviewed even though it didn't do the 1,000 content, or by turning it off and putting it back on over time, it just flipped it again back to the way it was, and it's, to my knowledge, still there. So it's really interesting. I kind of feel bad. I feel bad for Fritz 40K. I've been watching his channel for quite some time. I've only really started interacting with the channel more recently. There was a time when I was really doing my Eldar for 40K that I was on his forum and would occasionally write things. But I kind of, as my interest in 40K kind of waned over time recently, so did my watching Fritz's videos for a while. But then when he started putting a lot of Battletech stuff up, I've been watching a lot more and commenting a lot more. And, And also, I guess he had some X-Wing stuff that I watched. I really think it's a shame that somebody that actually invests as much time as he did to get his subscriber count up to 30,000 and really like engage the community as much as he did, to just take it away without any explanation, have no avenue. I know this is commonplace for many channels that have this happen to them. It's not just Fritz, but this is like kind of like one of us, like one of the YouTubers and a really prominent YouTuber. And for that to happen, it's really, really a shame. And I even kind of looked on YouTube just to see what he could do. And I'm sure he's already looked into this, because there are lots of videos that talk about how to get your channel back and stuff. I just don't know. I trust that he's fully explored that, given the amount of effort he's put into his YouTube channel and where he brought it. And he's kind of come to the conclusion, he wrote on his forum, I saw today, that he's just going to have to lose it. And I don't think he is sure whether he's going to start over, because I think he may be looking at it as an opportunity to try another way to engage the community outside of YouTube. But I really do feel that that's a shame. So I don't know if you guys that are content producers that watch my channel have also been having trouble. But I really hope that we don't actually experience that. One thing that I did hear is that if you put a lot of tags in your description that maybe match your tags, that you may be predisposed to actually being looked at as like spam or something like that, or over tagging, and that might happen. I've always just, one of the standard tags I've always put in all my videos is just wargaming. And recently, in listening to discussion, some folks have said that it may be things that have to do with war and things like that that may be the reason why a wargaming channel, even though it's not, a bad channel, or have like controversial content, it may be flagged for that reason. So just without even knowing fully whether it's causing that, I'm taking that tag out of all of my videos for in the future. I'm not going back and redoing anything, but just all my future videos, I'm just removing wargaming description within the tag, and hopefully that will help. And I've never been one to intentionally put tags into the description that match like tags below or anything like that, and so the only way they would appear, and they do sometimes, is when I use a tag that's very relevant to the description of the video. So I might say, let's say it was a Warhammer 40k video and I was showcasing an Eldar Wraith Knight or something, I might have Eldar in my tag, and I might have Eldar in my description and my title as well. And I don't really know how you get around that, except for maybe some creative descriptive titles. I mean, you can call it, Eldari instead of Eldar in one and Eldar in the other or something. I don't know. But yeah, it really, I don't know how much more to really say about this topic, but so far, like my individual video, the one thing that it happened to, it's been fixed. It's unfortunate for those that get their whole channel actually shut down over something that's just basically a bot, probably, like some sort of computer bot that's just searching everything. It's scary because of the amount of time that you can invest in something, even if you're not making money off of it, and that's not the actual goal. It may just be that you're investing it as part of your hobby, and you value your interaction with people. And it's really hard, like, for somebody that brought a channel to like the point of 30,000 subscribers, and everything they're doing with the channel is based on having a community of that size, to then get reduced to nothing and have to start from scratch. It's not to say that as an individual you won't still enjoy it as much, but you almost kind of wonder, like, if you are, everybody in the YouTube community, or the actual organizational aspect of YouTube, they encourage you to try to build your channel, like, do all this stuff. But if you are actually following that route, and then you can just be taken away at a whim, it's very, very sad in my opinion, from that perspective. So, well, yeah, I think I am rambling now on the topic of YouTube trouble, but hopefully we don't have any more, and it gets better, and this is like kind of seen and recognized as an issue with the new YouTube. The fear that I do have is just that maybe the kind of like when they say they're not going to review unless you have 1,000 views, it's immediately just saying that you're not a priority unless you're a bigger channel that gets a lot of traffic. And now, Fritz actually is a big channel for the wargaming perspective. I don't know, I know he's not like from the social aspect of YouTube and some of those kind of channels, and even like video gaming and things. But if that continues to go to be the case, where only like bigger channels that have already proven themselves to have like lots of traffic are the priority, and you can basically be squashed at any moment without any recourse as a smaller channel, it really may limit the lifespan and viability of this for a niche hobby like we have. And so I hope that isn't the case, and we'll see going forward just how it goes. So, well, not sure how long this has taken today. I appreciate you guys watching while you're painting or doing what you're doing, and talk to you later.